What's going on? Slip is here with match 3. We are again on the play. It is our day. And we see this hand. So on the play, Logic Knot's going to be pretty functional. We have half of our combo. We have a pier. It's okay. I decide to keep it. Just going to fetch turn 1. Going to get white for Supreme Verdict or Sarams. We see Shambling Vent, so we're up against like tokens, Abzan. We could be playing against that blue, white-black Smallpox deck, or we could be playing against Eldrazi and Taxes. So Abzan and D&T, the two likely ones there. We get another fetch. Might as well run that out just in case we're playing against D&T. And our opponent plays an Arbiter. So glad we fetched. We're not going to counter that for the moment, though. We're going to peer. We see Esper Charm, Logic Knot, Spell Snare. So Esper Charm is okay. Our opponent has a lot of cards in hand. For us to start Esper Charming them like right away, we're probably going to have to counter something next turn. So I decided to just take the Spell Snare. It's pretty live in this matchup, right? Targets are Thalia, Arbiter, Tidehollow, Sculler. So a lot of stuff to do there. And especially if our opponent plays Ghost Quarter here, we want to be able to counter his 2-mana play. If he goes like, say, Thalia plus Ghost Quarter, we want to not get Stone Rained or Strip Mined here. He does not play Ghost Quarter. He plays Displacer, which we're going to promptly counter because that card's pretty annoying, and we're running a reasonable amount of spot removal. So I'm going to shock myself so that I can play out this Snapcaster if I need to. We can snap Pier, or we can snap Logic Knot. Now, if our opponent has Path to Exile, that's going to be annoying, because if we run out Snap here to chump, or to trade with this Arbiter, and we're holding up Logic Knot, if he paths the snap, we can't actually Logic Knot. We have to like pay the Arbiter cost, blah, blah, blah. But I decided 12 life. I'm just going to go ahead and like think about doing this, and I'm gonna run it out. I'm gonna hit Logic Knot here. I'm gonna trade. Hold up Logic Knot the rest of the turn. We dodge Path. That's good. Maybe that was the right play. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I should have Esper Charmed and waited until we got some spot removal. But our opponent also, he played a Ghost Quarter, so it was kind of a weird situation. With Leon and Arbiter off the board, Ghost Quarter partly my motivation for getting Arbiter off the board. We want to go ahead and Sarams here into Beck. We draw a fetch. We want to go ahead and crack that, hold up Spell Snare. And our opponent plays Thought-Knot Seer, which is probably going to take Esper Charm. It does. We draw a Beck Call. That's good. Part of the benefit of digging into our deck, right? We have 9 fewer cards, 8 fewer cards now in our deck than our opponent. Can't really attack profitably with Thought-Knot Seer. Our opponent's just wishing us well here. He hadn't seen our good luck stuff. So that's good. We're going to go ahead and attack with the Flyers. And then because this jar isn't on 2, we can go ahead and Beck Call on our opponent's turn. I actually forgot to play a land there. That was dumb. And maybe I should have played Jar as well. But there are a lot of things we can draw. And I'm fine doing this. And our opponent just scoops. So the reason we don't want to let our opponent get this vial to 2 with when we're going to Beck Call is that he or she can Tidehollow Scholar in response and take our Beck, right, before the jar trigger resolves. And at the moment, we don't have any removal for it. So if we had like a push, right, our opponent Scullers, takes the Beck, we push it, we get the Beck back, the jar is still on the stack, blah, blah, blah. That's cool. Let's go to game 2. Feeling pretty good about this. In this matchup, I actually took out a Blessed Alliance. That's not necessarily correct, but usually our opponent has a number of creatures, and a number of them are like good early and get worse. Like they can afford to sacrifice an Arbiter, right? They can afford to sacrifice a Sculler after a Strangler's been played, something like that. So, you know, it's Blessed Alliance, maybe I should have left it in, maybe not. I took out a Logic Knot because of Vial. I brought in the Verdict, obviously, and I brought in the Ruined Halos. So that's 3 there. I took out 1 Peer Through Depths just as a kind of random card. In some matchups, like we could cut, like shave an Esper Charm, but in this matchup, because of Vile, Esper Charm is really good. So like if our opponent has 2 cards in hand and they activate Vile and we Esper Charm them, it's a blowout, right? It's great. But it's also hard to Esper Charm them because they have to Vile first, right? It's this game. It's fun. This is always a fun matchup. So this hand is pretty weak. I decide I'm going to ship that, and I see this. And I probably should mull this, but I decide I could imagine worse 5-card hands, and our opponent's going to have like a reasonable amount of hand disruption going on. Might even have like Sin Collectors out of the board. So I'm going to keep this. We draw in a Verdict. That's a good draw. But our opponent's turn 1 Vile is probably going to be an issue for us because this Logic Knot is going to be terrible. Maybe I should have shaved 2 and played a Blessed Alliance. That might have been better. As it stands, we're just going to go ahead and fetch before our opponent's Vile gets to 2. And I shock myself so that he can't play a 3-drop this turn. Just want to mess up his curve a little bit. He plays Sculler, and now he can play a 3-drop anyway, but he plays Thalia, which is infuriating. We draw another Logic Knot, so just in case that's live against a Thought Knot Seer, and that's why our opponent took it. I'm going to hold it up. We're already down to 12. Cards we're looking to dodge. Well, there are a number of them. We draw Srams, which is okay. And our opponent plays Displacer, which is not good for us. So he can flicker this Sculler now on our end step and take our Verdict, so we can't Verdict next turn. That is incredibly unfortunate. We do have a Sram, so we might be able to get some blockers going here. At least to try to do something, right? On the other hand, he can just Displacer our blockers. And now we get a Beck Call, so we can Srams into Beck Call. What's the problem with that? This is a kind of 2-part business, right? When we put Srams on the stack, our opponent can say, like, hey, he might have something in that, like, after that Srams that he wants to cast for free. And then he can flicker Tide Hollow Sculler and take our Beck Call, which would be an excellent, excellent thing to do right now. So we play Srams. If he lets this start resolving, obviously, like in the middle of the spell, he can't do this. He has to do it now. And indeed, he taps mana. And indeed, I scoop instantly. So, like, we could have gotten 3 1/1s there. And maybe I should have played that out. But assuming our opponent has actually nothing in hand, like say our opponent has 2 lands in hand. If it's 2 lands, right, that means that he can blink 2 of our tokens next turn and he gets in for 4. We're at 1. We could still top deck a Verdict. That's possible. I think it's pretty unlikely our opponent doesn't have any other creatures to Vile in here. Oh, also our opponent has Shambling Vents. Well, can't activate that. But barring drawing like exactly a Supreme Verdict, we're not going to be in great shape. So on to game 3. Back on the play, right where we want to be. We see this hand. So we have push to answer an early Sculler and get back our Srams or Beck. Otherwise, it's like kind of a slightly weak hand, but I decide I'm going to keep it. It might end up benefiting us that it's a fetchless hand. It might not. We draw Jar, which is great, so I'm going to go ahead and play that. Now if our opponent takes something, he has to take he has to take exactly our Beck, right? He can't take an Enabler, and Srams is a value play. So here's a Thalia. I'm going to go ahead and fetch an extra white source, just so we can't get cut off for Srams before our opponent's Jar goes up to 2. Just in case he has a Sculler, I'm going to tick up Jar here to see if he Scullers in response. I would be interested. Maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe I should have waited till end step. But if our opponent has like 2 Scullers, the only way that would matter is if they had 2 Scullers, but they probably would have played them anyway. So we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to just let ourselves get hit by Thalia. And our opponent plays a Displacer. So that's a bit of an issue. We don't want to Fatal Push yet. We don't want to Fatal Push Thalia. We can't Fatal Push Displacer, because if our opponent plays Tide Hollow Sculler on our draw step, we need to be able to deal with that. Or not on our draw step necessarily, even in response to the Jar activation. That would be more likely. We draw Esper Charm, that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and shock here, just in case. I don't think it could matter, but just in case we really need that Fatal Push while the stack is happening. But there is no Sculler, and being no Sculler, I'm going to go ahead and path this Displacer so our removal is better. Opponent's turn, takes Vial up to 3. We're going to be able to Esper Charm next turn, which is good, and our opponent Zealous Persecutions. Well, that's an interesting business. Fortunately, we have Path and Fatal Push, so we're not going to get hit by anything next turn, probably, with the exception of maybe Shambling Vent if we don't quarter it. I'm just going to go ahead and... I was thinking about playing like Ruined Halo on something, right, against Hand Disruption. I decided that's probably not a good idea. I'd rather ship, and we're hoping our opponent activates Vial here. Opponent does activate Vial. Plays a Displacer. So now our opponent's at 2 cards in hand and 1 mana open with no Vial. We can kill both things on the board. Esper Charm our opponent. Path Displacer, right, yeah, kill both things on the board. Esper Charm our opponent here. Vial's on 3, so if in a pinch we really need to Ghost Quarter something to Spell Snare, we can. Now we have to decide whether we want to Spell Snare Arbiter or not. So our Colonnade is going to block this Shambling Vents profitably. We could Ruined Halo it, but that seems bad. But we're about to be able to Sram's Expertise, so I don't want to worry about this Leonin Arbiter. And I'm just going to path it now, which may seem a little counterintuitive because we're giving up our free answer to Shambling Vents. However, I don't really care about Shambling Vents. Vent, singular, I suppose. So we're going to play this Colonnade because it comes in tapped. Now we're really hoping our opponent taps out for a Thought-Knot Seer, because what we can do is amazing. In response to the Thought-Knot Seer, we can Sram's Expertise and cast Ruined Halo as a 1-mana instant, naming Thought-Knot Seer. It would be crazy. Unfortunately, our opponent does nothing of the sort. Our opponent plays Shambling Vents. We are going to cast Sram's and triple block this. We're going to do this, risking like getting blown out by a path. Isn't really getting blown out too badly. We will get a land, and we'll be able to block this with Colonnade next turn. And we get our Ruined Halo on the board. Here's Ruined Halo. Now we can name Thought-Knot Seer or Tide Hollow Sculler. I decide that I'm going to name Tide Hollow Sculler because I'm not sure, honestly, what the correct decision is, but we've seen one Thought-Knot Seer, and I don't know. I decide I'll pick the one our opponent probably has more of left in the deck, I guess. Our opponent's Zealous Persecutions again hits us for 3. We could have named something different here, but that's okay. At least we turn off a few of the cards in his deck. We're about to get to scry a bunch. Our opponent plays out a Vial, which I find a little strange. They could be baiting us into Esper Charming them by like randomly activating Vial with like a Vial in hand or something, and then we Esper Charm them and it's just totally wasted. But our opponent doesn't want to play that game. So we're going to tick this jar down to 1, and then we're going to peer. So we see Cryptic Srams. I don't really mind Cryptic, so I'm just going to draw it and hold up the pier. Okay. The reason, by the way, we did it in that order, in a certain sense, it's like an easier decision if you peer and then tick down jar, because the peer doesn't mess up your scry. However, if you like peer and see 2 cards you really want, you're going to have wished that you tick down jar, especially when it's for that amount, right? We ticked it down 3 or 4, 3, I guess. So we're going to we could have wanted that Srams. I don't know. but I decided to do it that way. It's not a huge deal. We're going to peer now. We can get another Cryptic, we can get an Esper Charm, we can get a Serum Visions. I don't really mind getting an Esper Charm. We're going to play a game with our opponent's Vials here. I'm going to tick this up so we have 1 mana Esper Charm now. We're still holding up this Colonnade as a blocker for Shambling Vents. Vent. Keep saying it plural. And our opponent isn't activating Vial and doing anything. So I think in the end, I'm just going to draw cards here. Opponent doesn't want to play the game. We won't play the game. Pretty good draws. Serum Vision, Fatal Push. We can afford mana-wise to Serum Visions once here. Now we have 1 mana Cryptic. Supreme Verdict. Not too bad. Not too bad. Not sure we really want that, though. Opponent activates Shambling Vent. We're just going to go ahead and push it. We're assuming there was some kind of like shenanigans there. Either, you know, there's a Displacer that's going to come out of the Vial, or a Flicker Wisp, or there's a Path, so we'll just push that, deal with it later. We can scry down our jar here as well if we want to. We draw Beck. So now we're in this weird spot where, because we didn't scry down our jar, we bottom both of these, of course. Because we didn't scry down our jar, we either have to scry it down later, or we have to keep ticking it up. So it's a tough call. We're unlikely to really have anything to counter here. So I decide, just because there are Vials on 4 and 3, I decide I'm going to take it down. Both to the bottom. Play Swamp. We might as well attack with Colonnade here. This should bait out a Displacer or Flicker Wisp. If so, it does not. Our opponent does have a 3-drop. Could be Strangler. It's a Flicker Wisp. Okay, so they didn't Flicker Wisp the Colonnade that was attacking. They're going to Flicker Wisp the other Colonnade now that's not attacking, which I find interesting. So we didn't activate Jar in response to this. Now, that may seem a little weird because we would have drawn an extra card off this Flicker Wisp. However, if our opponent had Thought-Knot Seer, they obviously would have activated their Jar on 3 first, because they would want us to try to Beck in response, right? So that we would draw an extra card, and then in response to our Jar activation, they would play Thought-Knot Seer and take our Beck, and we would be very sad. So we want them to activate Vial, and we actually want to see the last card in their hand before we Beck call. So before this gets flickered, we're going to Fuse. And we draw Path, Snap, Cryptic, Ruined Halo. And this game is probably a lock. Well, it does have a 3-drop. They have a Sin Collector. Now they're empty-handed, so I'm just going to Path, Snap, Path, and swing for like 10 next turn or something. They can take 1 Cryptic, but it's not going to do anything. And that's good. That's very good. All right, on to match 4.